Hello everybody, and today for your viewing displeasure we have something a bit different than usual. This is a single player mission. It's one I've had for a long time. Actually, I downloaded it not that long after I started playing DCS. It's the Red Eagles intercept mission. It's pretty well made. Well, it's actually really well made. It's more catered towards, I kind of want to say a Blue 4 audience, but I kind of don't. Obviously, you are flying a MiG-21, but the actual setting of the mission is that you're a pilot for the 4477th Testing Evaluation Squadron at Tonopah. And you are assigned to intercept, air quotes, intercept a B-1 coming from across the test range as a way of evaluating the MiG-21's potential in the air defense role and training the B-1 crew to not get shot down. It's a pretty heavily scripted mission, but it's really well done. It runs really well. You don't have any, weird stutters or crashes you sometimes get when there's a lot of scripting involved. And it has a wonderful little feature in it, which you will see in a little while. Now, I have streamed this mission a couple times, and every time I have streamed it, it's been a dumpster fire. Usually because your boy, in the heat of the moment, forgot to set his weapons up correctly, or didn't actually give himself the correct offset from the target. Because, following basic instructions is hard. You will see a few times during this track file, I do bring up the F10 map. Completely contrary to my own words, just the other day on a stream, actually, about learning to use the radio navigation and Dead Reckoning instead of the F10 map marker. You will see I have F10 map markers turned on for single-player stuff because I don't do it very often. Usually when I do it's testing things to see if they're broken or not. So I do occasionally reference that just to figure out where I am. I'm not familiar with the NTTR map, not to the degree I am with Caucasus or Persian Gulf. And as well as that, I didn't find the actual relevant navigation kneeboard page until I was most of the way through the mission. There is a kneeboard page with all your waypoints, the radials they're on, the distance readout, like everything. If I'd found that page to start with, I wouldn't have had a problem. And I wouldn't have had to open F10 at all, not even once. The other thing is, since 2.7 dropped, the clouds have done something interesting. This mission had, I think it had either clear skies or very light broken clouds originally. But 2.7 has done some funky stuff with weather in most old missions. I haven't updated this since 2.7. I don't know if it has been updated since 2.7. I probably should have checked. But anyway, it is what it is. We've got low cloud over the vast majority of the map for this mission. It's not really going to affect the way we fly the mission too much. All it's going to do is make me unable to VFR. So I have to rely more on not only radio navigation and my dirty F10 cheating, but, just general intuition. I don't fly this mission perfectly. You'll see towards the end I actually miss a scripted point, so I miss a whole bunch of dialogue, not that it really matters. It's because I misnaved myself by about a kilometer or two and missed a trigger zone, I think. So it's not a big deal. But bear in mind, I am PVO brain. I don't understand American terminology. I don't expect to have to deal with American navigation procedures, so it is what it is. I'm more comfortable when I've got my my handler telling me exactly where to go, when to go there, how fast, and doing all the complicated math stuff so I don't have to. You can see here I'm tabbing through the kneeboard trying to figure out what my different waypoints will be, what courses I want, and all of that, and the default DCS waypoint markers on the kneeboard map are dog shit. The ones for MiG-24 that appear on its moving map display, if you can call it a moving map display, they're really nice, but the default DCS waypoint markers have no information other than, yes, it is a waypoint. So they're kind of shitty, especially if you're not as familiar with a map. And when they're all bunched up like that, it becomes quite hard to read them because they all overlap each other. So the start of the mission's pretty simple. We're having to do the American thing of hopping frequencies on the radio every 10 seconds to talk to someone different. this is where you can start to see the big difference between American and Soviet design philosophy in terms of where the radio is put and how the radio works. The MiG-21 has a single radio, the control head is in the right-hand cockpit wall, and it is set with 20 preset channels, which are generally channels for different air traffic control frequencies in the pilot's local area, as well as guard frequencies and so on. Compare and contrast to the average American fighter, even of this era, let alone modern stuff, where you have typically one or more radios. The control head is front and center in the cockpit. In fact, you know, in the more modern aircraft, it was moved to the base of the HUD. It's front and center on every level possible. And you're expected to swap between frequencies quite frequently, and you can key them in manually. Completely different. As far as Soviet tactical aircraft go, the only time you're going to have more than one radio at a time is if you are doing ground attack or supporting ground forces. So things like the Hind, things like the strike aircraft, Su-25, MiG-27, whatever, they would typically have more than one radio, but something like a MiG-21, which I want to remind you guys, the MiG-21 is not an interceptor. It was a frontline fighter that got shoehorned partly into the interceptor role later on. But even frontline fighters like the MiG-21, which are kind of operating I don't know if I'd say semi-independently, but not as strictly controlled as a PVO would be, which is the air defense arm. Even they only have the one radio with 20 presets. So big difference in the way information's handled and passed down to the pilot. The American system does give you a lot more flexibility. I don't think that anyone sane is going to argue with that, but it can also become very overwhelming. And this kind of ties in with the greater theme of, particularly the more modern, the Blue 4 jets in general, but especially the American jets. The more modern they get, the more task-saturated you become, and the more heads down you are in the cockpit. And therefore, the more likely some dipshit in a rust bucket MiG-21 is going to shoot you down before you know he's there. The MiG-21's kind of the opposite. I'm not dealing with the radio, like, ever, so I don't have to worry about it. The only task saturation I'm getting is from my instruments and my radar. You can see here I'm trying to actually unfuck my flight path a little. One thing I will say about the MiG-21's altimeter, at least in DCS on the monitor I have, it is a little difficult to read the inner scale at a glance. You can read it, you just have to kind of stare at it for a while or zoom in. At a glance it can be a little difficult. You'll also notice my other dear friend here, the MiG-21 porpoising effect. I believe this is down to the MiG-21 missing some real-life autopilot features. So in real life, I just flip on the stabilization mode, or even the return to horizontal flight mode, return to horizon mode, and then just fly the plane with the trim hat. Or, you know, if I need to control it, there's a little smiley face on the map there. ADHD. If you need to control it, you just bump the stick, and any stick input will trip the micro switches, disconnect the autopilot, you make whatever stick input. As soon as you let off pressure, the autopilot re-engages. It's not quite as Yoba as the Mirage or Viggen autopilots, especially since the MiG-21 can only trim for pitch. But it's quite cool. It is actually quite a good system for the era, remembering that this autopilot first began to appear in the 60s and 70s. By comparison, the F5 has no autopilot whatsoever. So they're giving us kind of the runaround here. I'm not sure exactly how much depth the mission maker went into to try and replicate real-life constant peg procedures. You know, I'm guessing they did at least some research, since they appear to be trying to keep me in a certain part of the range. And I know in real life it was a big concern to avoid letting MiGs overfly anywhere that the general public might see them and identify them, or even, you know, the Air Force at large. So you can see here, I'm flipping through. That is the kneeboard page, which I should have kept open. I just kind of glanced at it, and I flew the first part of this mission. I'll fess up right here. This is not one track file. This is a track file where I took control halfway through to unfuck the mistakes I made last night. So I flew this mission quite late last night. I was half asleep. I've been kind of sick all week. Not like sick, but drowsy and no energy and generally miserable kind of sick. I think my sleep cycle's shifting again. I don't know, whatever. So I wasn't really sharp last night, so I fucked up my intercept offset. I knew immediately what I'd done wrong, and I also forgot to flip my missile switch to the right mode as well. So I just took control partway through the mission and reflew the second half of it today to avoid having to take off from the ground again, do all this navigation stuff again. Now, if I did do the whole mission over from the start, it would be a lot cleaner flown, probably. Now that I know which page I want on the kneeboard and have a better concept of where the different steer points are, but I just thought, fuck it, I can't be arsed. So, yeah, this first part is flown last night, so my flying was pretty sloppy, and then halfway to the cap route, that's where I took control today. So you can see here we've been given our actual tasking finally, which is cap at bullseye 282 for 66. Boy do I love fucking bullseye calls as a Red 4 pilot, because I do not ever fucking use them. I had to actually open the F10 map, figure out where bullseye was, then figure out the radial, and it's horrible. Just please give me radials from my home airfield, please. Or an RSBN station. So our task is to go to the assigned cap point, which is roughly around Cedar Peak. So we're kind of flying back close to the airfield. Cedar Peak's about 40 kilometers southeast of it. So I need to establish a cap over Cedar Peak-ish, and wait while the B-1 takes off and gets into position. Now, I should mention here as well, the default loadout the mission spawns you with is not suited to the actual mission they want you to achieve from memory. It spawns you with heaters. I don't remember if they were R60s. Per the briefing, they should be. But I seem to recall it spawned me with R3S. A pair of R3S. So anyway, I just went ahead and put my own livery on the jet and put my own usual intercept loadout. So 2 R3Rs, 2 R60Ms. The intercept geometry for this is a forward quarter intercept, more or less head-on. And I'll be attacking from underneath. You know, the same kind of intercepts I try and set up on Cold War when I'm going to use the R3Rs on somebody. The same kind of intercept I set up for that Phantom mission, albeit in this case the target's quite a bit above me, so there's a bit of a snap-up involved. So the R3S is definitely, oh sorry, correction, the R3R is definitely the weapon for the job, and the R60s are kind of a fallback, which I have had to use before where I have messed up the intercept geometry. It's worth noting at this point that the target is moving quite fast. You'll see a call out from the GCI when he's coming into the play area, as it were. But just to spoil it slightly for you guys, he is doing about Mach 1.4. So that's the same target as the Phantom I've got set up in my nighttime intercept mission. It's actually a bit of a different intercept because here I'm coming in slower. In my Phantom mission, I'm coming in usually at Mach 1.8. So 1.4 for him, 1.8 for me, that's a pretty ridiculous closure speed, but it's a much lower altitude as well. Here, the target's coming in considerably above me at Mach 1.4, and I'm usually doing about Mach 1.2 by the time we cross paths. So for me to have to execute a turn if I fuck up and miss the target, to chase him down means me burning all of my fuel. I've had to do it before. I burnt all my fuel chasing the target. I did eventually get him with the R60s, and then I had to land. In one case, I bellied it next to a road, and in the other case, I landed at a very narrow little airstrip. It looks like it used to be a section of road, and I forget the name of it, and I don't want to mess up the track file by pressing F10, but those of you who play NTTR more often probably know exactly which one I'm talking about. It's away to the west of Tonopah, I think, from memory. Oh, and there was another time where I had to try and set down on the hard, like, it looks like a runway. I think it's part of Jackass Flats or Frenchman Flat. It's one of the nuclear testing ranges. But there's a concrete structure that looks like a runway with an apron. And I learnt the hard way that DCS does not consider that a runway or an apron, because as soon as I touched down on it, my shit got wrecked. I flipped over. There we go. I'm now on station. I'm more or less over Cedar Peak. So the actual cap route is to turn 280 and just fly sort of a racetrack from that bearing. But I kind of did my own thing here, so I circled back around until the RSBN was telling me I was pointed at the airfield, more or less, and then double back from there. And I timed it poorly, so that by the time I had to fence in, I was actually pointing the wrong way. I timed that part much better last night, but you know, it doesn't count for much if I messed up the actual intercept itself. You'll notice as well here that I've already got the weapon selector set to salvo on 3 and 4, which is where my R3Rs are, and you'll see that I've got the seeker head switch in the radar-guided missile position, because I learned a hard lesson. So here we go, here's the game plan. For this mission, I'll vector you for a forward quarter intercept with minimal lateral separation, which is exactly what you want in the 21. I'll try to place you almost head-on, 1,500 meters below your target. Once you obtain radar contact, quickly point your nose at the bandit. You won't have much time to get a tone and launch before he screams past you. I recommend set your weapon selector on salvo, which is what I've done. And those of you who've watched me fly the 21 really at all, let alone often, will know that I don't like using the salvo position, because it fires both missiles literally at the same time. And there is a greater than 0 chance that they will fly into each other in front of you and either destroy themselves or destroy you. I have had it happen to me. So I don't really like using the salvo switch, but here there's just not enough time. I have to use it, otherwise I'm only going to get one shot away. The second won't make the hit. You'll notice that the controller said he'd try set me up 1,500 meters below my target. Typically when I've run this, partly due to my own ineptitude and partly due to the timings involved, I've usually been a bit more than that. By the time the target appears on scope, I'm usually about 5 kilometers below him, so I'll begin pitching up and go full burner to try and get closer. I'm not actually sure what the vertical offset was this time. I'll have to check it in TACView, maybe put it in the comments or in the video description. But you don't want a big vertical separation for the R3R because it has such a short range. Its snap-up capability is really limited. And it also doesn't turn real well because, you know, it's based on an early Sidewinder. It's not the most maneuverable thing in the world. Now, against a really fast target, if you're really fast yourself, I'm talking like Mark II each way, you can get really good range out of them. I think Yink's record is about, what was it, 15 kilometers, something like that. Actually, no, I think it might have been even more than that, but he was up in space, going Mark II, with a 29 going Mark II the other way. Yeah, it was a team kill. It was after an event. They decided to do some testing. So the R3R is not hopeless at higher altitudes, but it's still not ideal. And this is part of what makes the MiG-21 so fun to do these intercepts with. You have such narrow timings, you absolutely have to nail it, otherwise you're not going to make the hit. You know, when the MiG-23 comes out, it's going to be much easier to do. You have better missiles, they got longer range, they've got better snap-up, you've got a better radar, so you can detect things further out. Like, everything happens so fast in the MiG-21, especially against supersonic targets when you're supersonic yourself. It's really challenging, and it's really fun. Now, in a moment here, after the fence-in call, you're about to see what makes me like this mission so much. You know, this is already a pretty well-done mission. It seems well-researched. It's got lots of good custom kneeboard pages. I just should have read them before I flew. It's historically based, at least to what extent it can be. The Americans never had a MiG-21 bis, as far as I know. They mostly had J-7s and F-13s. But yeah, it's a really solid mission up until this point, but wait until you see what's coming next. This is something that blew me away when I first played this mission. I don't know how it works. I assume it's through trigger zones and scripting and all sorts of fancy black magic that I won't understand, but it gives me hope. It gives me hope that we could one day see something which I would very much like in DCS. You know, dogfighting's all fun and cool, but air defense is my primary sort of love when it comes to combat aviation, so it's something that I would dearly love to see implemented in DCS, particularly with some of the upcoming aircraft we have. Hint, hint. So here is where I decide, shit, I better make another lap, because, you know, he's not ready yet. And I don't want to fly too far east and get out of my designated zone, or make my own intercept geometry harder than it needs to be by getting too close to the starting point. Here we go, there's the fence-in call. Mach 1.4, and that is a speed that he will maintain for his entire high-speed run. His altitude's quite high, he's about 50,000 feet, which is, I want to say, what, 15 kilometers? About 15 kilometers, something like that. So we got our radar on, we've already armed the well, all the weapons were already on. I armed them on the ground. The gun's not armed because I'm not going to be using the gun here, there's no way. Missiles are set, seek ahead switch is set, everything's good to go.
Red 1, turn left and steady, 135, climb and maintain 9,500 meters. Gate, set speed 1.6.
That is a working GCI script with text-to-speech. That's why I like this mission so much. That's something that, oh my god, if I had this in any other mission. So here I'm dropping the nose to pick up speed. The MiG-21 does struggle a bit to get through the speed of sound. Once it's supersonic, it accelerates like a demon. It's just Mach 1, it hits a bit of a wall. It's not area ruled, it's kind of a brick aerodynamically. Similar to the MiG-19, so it needs a little bit of help to get through Mach 1, but then once it's through it, it'll just keep accelerating. So actually here you'll see I have to throttle back to avoid going too fast. He wants me at Mach 1.2 here, he'll make a 1.2 call in a moment. The initial call is 1.6, I think that's just to get me to accelerate, to kind of drive home like, hey, you need to put your skates on, but after that he starts calling 1.2, and it's quite difficult to maintain that in the 21. I was in min burner and still getting to about 1.3. I've ranged out the radar already. I know I'm not going to have much time to acquire the target once he appears on that scope, so I've already got the TDC set halfway out. Saves me trying to run it out when he actually does appear and wasting time. So we're climbing here, we're still accelerating as well. Perhaps I should have accelerated to 1.6 and then zoomed up, but either way it works out.
1, turn left and steady at 075, climb and maintain 9,500 meters. Throttle back, set speed 1.2. Red 3-1, turn left and steady at 075, climb and maintain 12,000 meters. Throttle back, set speed 1.2.
Something I actually do need to get in the habit of when I'm doing these interceptors, I need to watch my instruments more. I tend to overshoot my course slightly, or bob and weave a bit because I'm too busy looking outside. I shouldn't be looking outside, I should be looking down at my instruments and my radar. And you can see me starting to realize that here. That I need to be looking down, I need to be paying closer attention to my heading, bearing, whatever you want to call it, my altitude and my speed. I'm still a little fast, I'm doing about 1.25. But I also need to climb, so I can convert some of that into altitude. I do overshoot my planned altitude here a little. It's kind of easy to do with the 21, it loves climbing. It's also a pain to set the trim in the 21 because you don't have very discrete trim movement. It moves in quite large steps, so it's always either too much or too little. So the default game there gives us a call. He's right off the nose, 45 miles. Remember, the default AWACS will give us calls in Imperial since we're set to US faction. And he's at 50,000 feet. We're just awaiting a final instruction from our own actual GCI. Watching that radar scope like a hawk. Watching my altitude, my airspeed. I'm still a little fast, 1.3, but it's within tolerance.
Red 3-1, turn right and steady at 084, climb and maintain 13,500 meters. Throttle back, set speed 1.2.
The height offset here is the killer. Lateral offset is a big problem, but you won't really have it here because this GCI does such a good job of setting you up. See that there's a little lateral. But he's actually pretty much straight on now because of that little last minute correction I made. Now the issue is getting enough nose position to get the missiles to snap up and hit. So I'm pulling a little bit of lead in the climb. I'm now close to his own altitude. Off go the missiles. And that's a splash. I think the B1's set to invulnerable, since we don't have any simulated missiles for the MiG-21. You know, we don't have any Cap 9 equivalents, especially for the R3R. But it is a good little mission. So now, switching stuff off, the radar can go off straight away, so we have plenty of vodka for the ground crew later. Weapons off. And now it's just a case of heading home. I did my usual thing before I took off. I set my RSBN to my home airfield, which is actually useful here because it starts referencing stuff from Tonopah Airfield. For instance, Cedar Peak is 107 for 42 kilometers from the airfield. So I did open F10 to check its position relative to the airfield, but I honestly wouldn't even need to do that. I could have just referenced it off the kneeboard and then checked my own gauges. We're back to being tossed back and forth between radio channels. And you can see here I had a moment of indecision whether it meant TTR 107 from the actual airfield 107 or if the bullseye was considered to no protest range. But thankfully I got the right answer, which is that it was from the actual airfield itself. Again, this is all American stuff. I don't know how this works. I have minimal knowledge of the US Air Force's procedures. Although, let's be real, I have minimal knowledge of anyone's procedures. Descending now through to 7,000 meters. I actually kind of overshot my descent there. I often do. The MiG-21, partly because it's a pain to trim, partly because it's not... not to say it's not as stable as it should be, but the stabilize mode on the autopilot doesn't work the way it's supposed to. Which would kind of give you an artificial stability. It's hard to describe. It's not quite as good as, say, the Mirage attitude hold, but it's kind of similar, is my understanding. So you could basically use that to keep the aircraft in an attitude hold, and then only put in stick inputs when you need to change that attitude. Anyway, that doesn't work properly in DCS, so it means a lot more hands-on flying, it means a lot more fighting with the MiG as it bobbles its nose up and down. I'm not sure about the way the ARU is scheduled. It seems to just go into full-on long-arm mode, regardless of speed, as soon as you go above 7 kilometers, which I'm not sure is supposed to happen. Is it 7? It might be 10, but there's like a ceiling. There's a very noticeable ceiling on the ARU for the 21 in DCS, and quite often actually it's happened to both me and Zach because I had to tell him what it was the other day. As you come back down through that ceiling, say you've just intercepted something up at 30 or 40,000 feet, you know, above 10 kilometers. And you were doing so at very high speed, as you come back down in a vertical dive through about 7 kilometers altitude, the aircraft will suddenly jolt, and you'll notice the ARU flip from long arm immediately into short arm, and that's because there's a hard ceiling on the ARU, and I don't think there's supposed to be. I think it's supposed to continue scheduling for speed no matter what altitude you're at. And if that was the case, that would certainly make the 21 more pleasant to fly at high Mach numbers, particularly around Mach 2. It becomes extremely unstable. It just wobbles all over the place. The slightest control input can over-G you. Now, in real life, that is an issue. That's, you know, why it's limited to 2.15 as a stability limit. Sorry, 2.05 is a stability limit. 2.1 on the BIS, I believe, but still 0.05 by the manuals. But yeah, like in DCS, any high speed at high altitude is going to be very unstable. And I'm not sure if it should be like that. Any excuse for my imprecise, wobbly flying, right guys? That's how that works. You'll see here as I overfly Cedar Peak, I get a prompt to switch radio channels. I'm not over it yet, I've still about 20 kilometers to go. In fact, in the interests of keeping this video reasonably short, we're going to go ahead and do some time acceleration until I'm a little closer. Alright, we're getting close. There's the call. Hold over Cedar Peak and contact Silverbow, which is the airfield's air traffic control, on button 2. So we go down, flip the radio to channel 2, and call home. Since I'd already started a right-hand orbit here, since, you know, the instruction is to anchor an orbit over Cedar Peak, I decided to complete the orbit rather than kick out to the left. So we do continue our circle here. Our next waypoint is 232 to Jesvo. And this is where I should have been watching my gauges a little more closely. I got more or less to where Jesvo is, but I overshot it just enough to fail to trigger the script, which would have had me then call Tanopa and tell them, hey, can I turn onto final? So the, you know, like, big whoop, I missed 2 pieces of dialogue. I didn't get the air traffic control telling me I was allowed to land, but I found my way home anyway. I did end up, I think it was actually altitude which I was out by. I think I descended too slowly. So I'm going to go ahead and actually time accelerate again. But yeah, I think I was a little too high when I hit Jesvo, and that's why it didn't trigger. My turn from, or rather my flight from Jesvo to the actual airfield, the final leg, was a bit messy as well. I ended up in the cloud because, you know, the 2.7 weather decided to generate heavy overcast, and I got slightly disorientated. I'm not instrument rated in real life. I mean, I'm still a student in real life, let alone instrument rated. So, my instrument flying instincts are not great. I can kind of do it in the sim, but often I need a bit of a wake-up call to realize, oh, right, it's IFR time now. And I got that here. You'll probably notice it. I started porpoising quite badly because I wasn't watching my speed as closely as I should have been. So right about here is where I realize I should have hit the waypoint. Distance reading of 36 kilometers from the airport. The radial's about 158, or maybe a little past it. But you'll notice my altitude is a touch high. I'm still up around 3,800, 3,900 meters instead of 32. So I'd say I was a little too high, and that's why it failed to trigger. So we're into the cloud here. I start turning in towards the airfield. Because I figure, fuck it, I passed over my steer point. I may as well make the actual turn. I know where the airfield is because of the magic of RSBN. The issue is just making sure I don't smack into the ground because of this cloud. And the cloud is, remember, very, very low. I think there's like maybe 200 meters, maybe, between it and the ground. So, and that's at the airfield. There's hills around the airfield. So you can see there my altitude's getting a little bit wonky, and I'll get a little more wonky here in a second as the speed builds up and I forget to trim. Right around here I was pushing the nose down, but again, because I failed to trim as the speed built, it pushed me back up. I realized I was punching back up through the top of the cloud layer, and that's when I got control of my aircraft and fed some trim into it. At least momentarily, until the same thing started happening again. To get a brief glimpse at the ground there, so you can see there's really not much space under this. We really get carried away here with the airspeed. And as a result, punch back out through the top. But once again, I picked up on it and corrected. Arguably overcorrected. Still following the RSBN in. Now, one other thing that I still haven't got used to is actually using the instruments to land in the MiG-21. I have a habit of watching the big needles on the vertical gyro instead of the little needles at the top and the left side, which are the ones that you want to watch. Those are your ILS. Yeah, so I've got to get used to using the MiG-21's ILS. It's not something that I really have to use very often. You know, typically, when you're playing DCS, especially multiplayer PvP, it's going to be daylight, it's going to be fair-ish weather. Like, even if it's overcast, there's going to be enough room that you can find the airfield. Like, people don't like flying in inclement weather or night in DCS, so you don't get a lot of practice if you only play multiplayer. So that's something I might have to make some single-player missions to hone my skills on, I think. But nevertheless, we do pop out near the airfield, a little off course, but we're able to turn back on. And you'll notice because I had the RSBN in landing mode, I wasn't on the glide path, and so it isn't giving me any corrections until I do intercept the glide path a little further to the right here. I probably should have been using cloud penetration mode until I was in close, and then switched over. But again, this is a skill that I have to practice, and a procedure that I have to memorize. But it's an easy enough approach to recover. So you can see me lining up here. Here I actually did start watching the needles. I was trying to at least use the ILS to line up horizontally, if nothing else, just to get that little bit of practice, in a condition where, if I need to, I can just glance up and see the runway. So there we go, that's brought us pretty much on center. 300 kilometers an hour, which is just about perfect. Last second flare. And we butted it. I decided to try some aero braking here. It's not something I usually do in the 21. Partly because I'm just in a hurry to fucking turn around and get back in the air again, so it's faster to just trip the parachute. But also because the MiG-21 in DCS has a habit of slapping its nose down as soon as the main gear touches. And so to aero brake, you either have to preempt that, which, at least with my control setup, kind of risks a tail strike, or you have to let it touch down but then pull it again, but you've got to make sure you're at a speed where the aircraft won't try and become airborne. You know, MiG-21 likes to fly at low speed, and so it's a bit of a risk pulling the nose up that the aircraft will actually become airborne again, well below the speed where you want to be airborne. Now that we're home safe, we can start turning things off. And I don't remember which hangar I started from, so I'm just going to park in whichever hangar I feel like, pretty much. But the mission has been accomplished. We intercepted the B-1, we scored a simulated, I guess, air quotes, hit on it with 2 R3Rs, and then we returned to base with actually a decent amount of fuel left. The third group of tanks alight is still only blinking, it hasn't come on solid yet. So that means we've still got at least... actually, correction, the first group of tanks light, my bad. Yeah, the first group of tanks light is blinking, which means we've still got quite a decent amount left. Somewhere up around maybe 800-900 liters, I think, from memory. I decided this hangar has a little cart outside of it. Like, it looks like the mission maker went to some effort to populate this area with stuff. Then again, it could just be default map scenery. I oversteer a little here. And there we go. Yeah, about 800 litres of fuel left, which is plenty. That's pretty much ideal landing weight for a MiG-21. Enough that I can go around if I need to, several times, but not enough to be heavy. Anyway, hope you guys enjoyed this. I will put a link to the mission file in the comments and or video description. And I hope you guys enjoyed as much as I did. Hopefully we can see something like this GCI script in more missions in the future. Who knows? Maybe even integrated into the base game. Maybe one day.